Hello, I'm Tommy Moore from the Bartitsu Lab, and in this video we're going to be looking at repeatedly striking and some of the things you can do to maintain the power, the speed and the efficacy of what you're doing. Now, a really good example of this is, let's say you take a human, or in this instance a bob dummy, or someone on the pad, someone on the bag, whatever, and you hit at full speed and full power. Most people have about 3 to 5 seconds of really good power and speed, and then it starts to dip. It's like an engine, it's losing acceleration. It drops. Sometimes, if you're making, if you're exhaling and you're moving, it can look to others like it's still got the same force behind it, but you yourself know if you're going at it full speed and power, bam, 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 palm strikes, fucking punches, whatever the fuck you want, you absolutely applying that blitzkrieg, it's hugely exhausting. It's hugely exhausting, whether you're successfully hitting on target or whether it's covering up or turning or moving away. It's very instinctive for humans to fight in this flurry motion. Most fights aren't fights, they're flurries. They are a push, bam, 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 done. Yeah, you do get a couple of just boom, ambush knockouts, but they're exactly that, ambush knockouts. If both parties know a fight's going to happen, it's typically delivered in a flurry. Now the problem is it's very exhausting, and you can end up burning yourself out or hitting inappropriate or inopportune targets. Give it a go yourself. If you think yourself a reasonably fit person, go at a target, hammer and tongs, as fast and as powerful as you can, and notice how quickly the engine starts to dip. So if you imagine, if he survived that first bit of the encounter, bang, 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 it's now getting easier and easier for him as I burn myself out. So one of the best ways to maintain constant pressure and constant assault, because the act of blitzing, the act of eviscerating that fucker by throwing lots of stuff, is very important. It's an important attribute to build. But you've got to be able to put some safeguards in to make sure that you don't end up knackered, gassed, punching elbows and foreheads or hitting things that just don't matter, that don't count. So one of the easiest things to do, and the easiest things, and I'll draw this off a mitt for you, is if you take a mitt and you hit with as many big right hands as you can, as fast and as hard as possible. Soon as you start to feel the power dip, change the technique. Soon as you feel the dip, change the dynamic of the technique. So bang, bang, bang. I feel the power dip a little bit, change to hammer fists. Soon as you start to feel the hammer fist start to lose its potency, you might start moving into your elbows. So you can maintain this flurry, 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 flurry. As far as he's concerned, he doesn't care what he's being hit with, he just knows he's being battered by stuff. But for you, it's often much less fatiguing to change the technique mid-flow to make sure you're doing it with the right efficacy and force and speed. You can move. Changing the technique uses different muscle groups, which allows the first muscle groups to start to recover a little bit. It's also good practice because if I'm holding him and twatting him in the face, I say I'm doing it with the palm heel, whatever, eventually if I haven't knocked him out, he's going to start to dip his chin or cover his head. Yep. And that will soon render that technique from my half relatively pointless. So if I get used to landing 3 or 4 solids and then changing the angle, he has to readjust to that. So the pain he was getting on his jaw is now damage he's getting on his collarbone, which is then becoming damage he's getting behind the ear, whatever. So being able to blitz, but change the technique before it becomes too fatiguing, and then you can go back to what you started with. There are infinite possibilities. But I'd say, as you start to blitz scientifically, changing the technique is important because it uses different muscle groups. Changing the position also really helps. So even if I don't change the tool, the fact that I'm firing crosses here, and then I manipulate and start to throw them here, for argument's sake, me just changing where I'm hitting also has an effect. It also allows me to recover or not over fatigue those muscle groups. So if I went, say, 5 straights to the head, if I continue to do straights to the head, it's going to start to really fatigue me. So I might change to straights to the body. So again, changing the position, being high or low, low to high. That is another good way to safeguard yourself against the fatigue that can happen. Another thing you can do to safeguard against that fatigue is get a handle. So let's say I've achieved this hoodie position. When I hit, if I've got the handle, it really does help that muscle fatigue. You can go a lot longer. The best way is to try it, feel it. Put some clothing on a bob, grab a training partner if your part of the world's open, get a handle, so a hoodie, lapel, belt, throw as many of the same technique in a cluster as you can. You'll find it's a lot less tiring than if you didn't have that attachment. So changing the technique, straights to hammer fists to elbows, reduces the fatigue, increases the power, increases the speed. Changing position, so it's the same kind of technique, but now we're going high to low, low to high. Obtaining a handle, so grabbing clothing, is really, really important. Those are 3 ways you can maintain blitz-like pressure, bang, 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 without gassing yourself entirely and allowing you to keep going, to keep that momentum on the man. Because you always want to keep the pressure on, keep them on the back foot, keep yourself in that aggressive nose over toes predator mindset. You want to be going at that human with all that you've got. But you will find that the more you start to practice these blitz drills, if you're really putting heart and soul into those shots, sometimes even after 3, 4, 5, even if you find yourself relatively fit for sparring and competing, as soon as you start to do it with a bit of emotional content, with all that you've got, it can start to unravel after that number of strikes. Hopefully you don't need that many, but humans are resilient. We are the dominant species on the planet for a reason. You know, we have got a supercomputer in our heads, we've got forward-facing predator eyes, we've got a really solid muscular system, we're a clever fighting monkey. So it doesn't matter if it's an absolute scumbag, some fucking method, he's still, like you, an apex predator. So sometimes it takes more than one to put him down. So again, very, very important if you are looking to blitz, to steamroll them with strikes or attacks. Be wary of how quickly you can gas. As soon as you gas and fade or open, as soon as your attack lets up, let's imagine that I've caught him by surprise. As soon as that starts to have a little less impact, that might give him the little breather he needs to pull out that knife from his pocket and fuck you up, because he's had that little gap. Any breather you have, any pause in the fighting might allow him to tool up or do something different, do something unexpected. But if you can maintain the onward assault without losing too much force and speed, it's going to be very hard for him to turn the tide. It's going to be very hard for him to think about anything but survival, and that's what you want. You want to keep blitzing until he is no longer a threat and you can escape. So again, just some things to think about to avoid the fatigue. To avoid the fatigue, change the techniques more often than you think, change the position or change the handle that you're holding. Those 3 things will allow you to keep it fresh and keep the assault in a steady, powerful bombardment with very few gaps. It's an important thing to practice. Have a go.